Welcome to a very special Nerds and Friends exclusive with the man, the myth, the legend, Caleb Whittle, joining us today to talk about video game adaptations. But Caleb, before we jump in, thank you for joining us. I love all the content you've been doing on TikTok lately, and then you also have a podcast about business, right?
Yeah, it's called Everyday Entrepreneurs. I haven't recorded in quite some time because my job took over my life.
Yeah, yeah, I know how that goes. I'm not currently in that, but I know how that goes. But where can the viewers slash listeners find you on social media or on that? Is that podcast on Spotify and most other venues?
It should be. I just switched like the hosting platform, so I'm hoping it still is.
Okay, I can check for you after the podcast.
Yeah. Anywhere you listen to podcasts, and then my own socials. TikTok is CW.
Nice.
That's where the video in question resides that we're going to talk about today.
Correct. And then do you want to promote Whittle Lifts, your fitness transformation?
Yes, yeah, and then there's Whittle lifts because I lift just a whittle bit. That's also on TikTok. I kicked off a journey back in like August of training for my first bodybuilding show, so it's documenting progress and stuff I've learned on that channel.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I think it's been a few months since I've seen you. We hung out for the solar eclipse last, but I've known you for almost probably a decade and a half, maybe almost 2 decades, and you were definitely the most like ripped and shredded I've ever seen. So very impressive stuff.
Yes.
So whenever I have fitness questions, Caleb's the first person I go to. So
Heck yeah.
But today we're talking about video adaptations because back in the day we played many a game together, and yeah, I mean your video that I saw on your TikTok, which I loved, is a really cool breakdown of like what makes or breaks a video game adaptation, and it was geared towards kind of talking about the Fallout series that's coming up, which you're in, which is awesome. Very excited for that. But you also went in depth about how it made a really wise choice of not only having people involved in the video game involved and really clearly defined producing roles for the show, but also that with Fallout being an open world game that does have a main quest and a storyline, there, because the way your character does that, actually in the Fallout games, you don't have too much choice in completing those main quests, but you have so much choice. Like it's about the journey getting there. So I think, as you said, they made a really wise choice of they're telling a story in that world, totally new characters. It's going to help people who haven't played the game explore the world and give people who have played the game a new glimpse at a new facet of the world. That's a great way to do it. So
and I think like just in general, video game adaptations, they're one of the hardest things to do because you have to appeal to two totally different types of people. You have to appeal and stay true to like the players of the game because typically that game has made a big impact on their life, and so like, oh my gosh, like this is real life adaptation, cool, let's see how it is. So you have to like appease them while at the same time making a show that brings in new people into the world and like just the general public that tells a good story to like get kind of the mass reach of the show. So if you don't do one of those things, you set yourself up for a pretty big failure. Because you can either really piss off the players of the game or make a show that is so unique to the players of the game that like no one else is interested.
Yeah, and I mean the contrast you drew was with the new Halo series, which I've only seen the first episode, but I remember when I watched it with our mutual friend who we visited for the Eclipse. I watched it with him, and I thought, as someone who played the Halo games religiously growing up, I mean, I loved those games for the gameplay and playing them, but at the same time, I loved the storyline. They're an excellent science fiction adventure. They had books back in the day for those that were awesome, and like so there was a big lore that I really enjoyed as like an extension of the game, and so I knew that if I wanted to replicate the experience of playing the game, you just go back and play the game. But I wanted cool stories in that universe, and when I saw that first episode, I was like, okay, if I was someone who never consumed any Halo content and came in fresh, this would be decent as like a sci-fi show. But in terms of someone who knows Halo lore and the games, I was like, what is this? Like, and so I know I've heard it gets better in season 2, but still like it proves your point that you have to consider both target audience, which is the players, and new people. And that's so hard because they're such different groups.
Well, and the writers of the Halo show even admitted they stayed away from the games. Like they'd never played them.
Terrible.
Like they had little interaction with like 343 Industries. So like, yeah, you set yourself up for failure there,
Yeah.
especially with the players. And I felt the same way. Like I feel like we probably shared over 100 overnighters of
Oh,
Halo
easy. Yeah.
playing, like easy.
I
And
still
so
dream the soundtrack sometimes, you know.
yeah. Like,
Yes.
and it's, yes, the second season does get a little bit better, but it's still, I think it's a little bit better because you get over the fact that, like, okay, this isn't just like, this isn't accurate. So I'm just going to
Yeah.
remove all of my preconceptions of the story and just watch it as a sci-fi show. And then you're like, okay, yeah, it's pretty
Right.
good. Like, yeah, I mean, they pissed every player off the second Master Chief took off his helmet.
Yep.
Like that was
Yeah.
the biggest sign of like, okay, yeah, this person's never played the games because that
Yeah.
was like the big thing, right?
And
Um,
as a producer myself, that would have saved them so much money. You can just have an actor who has the physicality and then have a voice actor cheaper than
yeah,
hiring
yeah,
that guy who was on
right.
the Mars show and Narcos. He's a great actor, but I
He's a
was
great
like,
actor.
could have
Yeah,
saved money and stayed true to the game. Come on, guys. You know?
right, right. So like, and the fact that like they told like totally different story, like
Yeah.
nothing really meshes from the actual gameplay, and
It
even
felt
watching the
like
second,
Marvel's What If, but just
yeah.
Halo, you know?
Yeah, and, like, even playing like, watching it, I'm going back and playing the games now
Yeah.
just to, like, have some nostalgia in my life, and
It's awesome.
it's yeah, like, I'm like, yeah, like, trying to piece together where the show doesn't fit, like, it's just an
Yeah.
alternate universe,
What
that's it.
and I don't know if it changes after the first season, but the first episode, but like the first episode, the tone was similar but not quite. Like Halo is a very serious like humanity versus the Covenant big deal, but there is a lot of humor, especially with the way they write the Marines and some of the people.
Yeah,
Like there are little bits of humor. I didn't catch any of that in the first
no,
episode of the show. Yeah.
no,
But
and
yeah.
that's, like, in contrast to the Fallout show and what we all can expect, and, like, even just from the trailers, right? That's
Yes.
all we have to go off of
It
right
looks like
now.
based on the trailer, they nailed the tone from what I could see.
Yeah, where it's like, yeah, it's a very serious subject, post-apocalyptic, like things are messed up, but they don't take themselves too seriously, and it's still like really funny. Like I cracked up with the lady in that city where she's like, "You really have like you really don't know what's like you're an actual vault dweller." And like it's just it's
Yeah.
funny, and I think that tone, at least of the trailer, which hopefully, fingers crossed, is the tone of the show. Like they nailed it.
Yeah, and that looks really exciting. And so, as the slow build up to my big question though, because I was thinking about what video game, because there are some video games where like they had a good story, but the gameplay is really what I remember. Like
Mhm.
XCOM 2, I play that game for the gameplay. I love the vibe, I love the storyline, but that's not the focus of the game nor the way I play it. But like I was trying to think of what games I would love to adapt, and I was thinking
Mm.
of Mass Effect. I love the Mass Effect trilogy. And the reason I wanted to adapt it was because that game is incredibly cinematic. I think it has one of the best, most detailed, in-depth sci-fi stories of any video game. And there are people who typically a lot of people my age with similar interests to me have played those, but there are people who are older than me and younger than me who don't want to sit through and play the game that I think would genuinely enjoy the story. So I thought, well, it's got such a rich story, like that'd be an easy adaptation. But then the more I thought about it, and after watching your video, I don't know how I'd do that because, and I'd love to hear. I'm grilling you on the podcast about how you do it. Um, like if you were the showrunner of a Mass Effect adaptation TV show, because like you've played the three games, right?
Yep.
Yeah, and like I mean, it's interesting because it's not like Dungeons and Dragons or an open world game where you have free reign. You have a lot of options for like what order you do things in, and then side quests you have a lot of variability on how those play out. But even from the start, I mean, after you customize your character's appearance, you're choosing their backstory from three options, and then their like career specialization from three options, and then from there you have a couple ways you can play the character. Um, and that results in multiple different endings. So it's not like infinite possibilities like Fallout, where you'd want to steer clear of the main quest and tell a story in the universe. I feel like the story Commander Shepard embarks on is so integral to everyone in that story
Yeah.
that, like, telling a story of side characters, you'd still have to reference what Commander Shepard's doing against the Reapers and that threat. So, like, I think of my first playthrough, and then like my second playthrough, I followed a similar path.
Okay.
Um, how would you not alienate the players? Because I feel like they're so fractured in terms of how they envision the protagonist of Commander Shepard, how they envision the main quest playing out, and like their relation to all of those events. How would you approach that?
Yeah. Well, Mass Effect is unique, and to your point, we're like there's a main quest, a main sideline, and like it has massive repercussions for the world that you're in,
Yeah,
right? Whereas, and like it is a linear story throughout the three games, and you can like the outcomes of that linear story are based on your decisions. But I also think like another really great video game adaptation where it is a linear story is The Last of Us.
yeah,
And like they did a scene by scene comparison. Like I saw this where like it was almost the exact same scene,
yeah,
just as a TV show, right? And that's because like The Last of Us story is just so good
yeah.
that by doing that, they appealed to like the general public and telling a good story.
Yeah, and that was, I think, probably the most like successful modern video game adaptation. But
Yeah.
now, I have not played The Last of Us.
I haven't either.
I've watched people play it, but I'm curious, like in that
Yeah,
story, because you play as the girl Ellie, right? That's who you play as,
I think
or do
so.
you play as Pedro Pascal's character
I
Joel?
don't actually
I did.
know, but I
Well,
just know that like
I
seeing that comparison, I was like, okay, that's why this is successful, is because they stuck
yeah.
very, very closely to the game.
But it seems like in that game, other than figuring out from what I've seen of it, like you have your tactics fighting the infected or whatever, and then you have kind of as you glean info and learn information, it comes up. But it seems like there's not a lot of choice. Whereas like
Right.
I think the issue for Mass Effect, if I was approaching that as a writer or producer, is that there there's like a number of outcomes that's more than one for the main story, but it's like like half a dozen really of like main bulk possibilities. So I wouldn't want to alienate like 5 6 of the player half of the audience. So like
Right.
the closest thing I could think of, because over the last couple days we talked about doing this podcast, I've given it way more thought than I should. um but I guess I would almost do like a kind of, and I don't know how I'd set this up even for the audience, but like saying like, okay, every time someone played the game, you solved that narrative in one possible arc, and every choice you made created a new timeline or reality for
Yeah.
Commander Shepard. So this is going to be the show is going to be an entirely new one. So there'll be a lot of familiar events, but this character is not going to be. I mean, what are the three background options? It's like off-worlder,
Mm.
space colonist, or war hero or whatever. Like I would make a character that's different from all three of those and be like, this is a totally new Commander Shepard, but it's going to be navigating the same story you all know. So there's the richness of the story, but a very new protagonist, and I would hope that wouldn't alienate players who want however their Commander Shepard was to be replicated on the screen. That's the best I could come up with.
Yeah, because like, yeah, Mass Effect. Because okay, so like Halo, for instance, like there's such a big world, there's so many things going on. You can very easily just pick a random character in the world that doesn't even exist in the video games and make a whole story about them
Yeah.
and be just fine,
Hmm.
right? Or you tell the Master Chief story, but you do it very linearly and very accurate to the game, right?
Right.
Like those are kind of your two options.
Well, because with the style of that game too, like they did a novel adaptation of the first Halo game, and it was cool because all those battles and skirmishes that Master Chief was in that I knew from being Master Chief playing it,
Yeah,
the book was very smart and it didn't dwell on those. It dealt on the in between missions and the drama with the other ODSTs and the other officers that survived on the Pillar of Autumn or whatever, and so it gave you like the other half of the same story. And so now when I think of the events of the first Halo, I have a very full picture. Um,
right.
and
But you
Mass Effect
can't,
kind of gives you that already. So I
yeah,
don't know.
you can't quite do that with Mass Effect because they didn't like in comparison with Halo or Fallout or some of these other games, like they didn't do a huge world building as like in terms of building the entire world and understanding what's going on in like the universe of Mass Effect. they didn't spend a lot of time on that. So we don't like we can't just dive in and be like, "Oh, cool, we'll tell a different story that's in like the Mass Effect world," because
Well, I mean, actually, the weird thing is they do like how in depth you want to go is a choice you can make as you play the game.
yeah.
But with the codex and stuff, there's so much. I could probably spit off tons of useless lore about the Mass Effect world, but it's just that with the way the
So
narrative's set up, is that it's got some really cool sci-fi stories, but like it's all very like mid-level stakes for all of those different
yes,
conflicts and
right.
factions. And so when the Reapers come in and there's that existential threat, suddenly all that stuff is just a very cool detailed backdrop for this massive struggle against one big threat, and your character navigating everyone's different allegiances and prejudices and trying to unite everyone against the Reapers. And so that works extremely well for the video game, but I think as an adaptation it would hurt because it's like how do we do this?
Yeah, and maybe it is just like a linear, but I think another possibility is you either like back up in time or fast forward in time,
Yeah,
and it's a time change, so then you can play with new characters instead of like being in
yeah,
the same timeline as the games.
yeah.
um I think I was reading up on it a little bit, but I think the Witcher kind of did this,
Oh, okay.
but The Witcher's different than like
Because
what
it's
we're talking about because they
book
have the
video
books.
game
Yeah, book,
show.
video
Yeah,
game, show,
right.
and like the video games are like years after the book,
Oh,
but then the show's going like with source material from the book, so it doesn't
uh,
quite line up with the video. So like
interesting.
there's also the timeline angle of how a video game adaptation can happen,
Yeah,
which I think may be the best case with Mass Effect, because then you can explore like the different factions and it just becomes like a really cool sci-fi show maybe before the Reapers are even a threat, and maybe it's like some other threat that exists. Or you have, I know you really like the show, but The Expanse,
yes,
like there are several factions and there's a lot of things going on, and like
yeah,
it can be a similar style of
yeah,
show where there is something that's happening that is like making these factions start to unite or whatever it is.
yeah.
But that might be how I would approach it, because it's there's too many options on the linear side,
Right.
and there's not enough details on like, oh, this is just happening on this other world or like this
Yeah,
other universe, wherein like, hey, like the Reapers are affecting everyone, so like
yeah.
naturally Shepard's going to come into play there. So I think the timeline way might be the way to approach it.
And probably the richest past thing that would be really good to explore for a show would be like the first contact war, when humans first made contact with the
Mm,
Turians and they have a big fight, and then eventually they get an armistice, and then the humans end up joining the Council of the Galactic Society or whatever, which I
yeah.
mean took place like 40, 50 years before the events of the game, if I'm remembering correctly. That'd be cool. My concern as a writer would be, okay, if we do that, setting up things before the video game and people get tied to the characters and the world and the factions, then they're going to be like, all right, like, where does this go? And it's like, well, now you have to play the video game. And if there are people who don't want to play a video game, I'm like, okay, like that sucks. And then, like, if you do one after the effects of those games, like you're going to have to reference the events of whatever Commander Shepard did versus the Reapers, but you have to be vague because you don't want to take away the possibilities that the players had, which I mean, they kind of tried to do in Mass Effect Andromeda, where it takes place like 1,000 years in the future. And they're like, well, there was a thing. And it's like, well, the fact that you're acknowledging it, but we can't like explore the ramifications is kind of, so
Yeah.
it's just, I wish there was a way to do it because I feel like the world is so cool, the way that your character understands the ramifications of the plot, the way they reveal it in the game is so cool. And I'm just worried that if you picked like if you surveyed players and were like, what's the most popular choices and background for Commander Shepard, and we did that, you'd still be alienating like a large percentage of people because people get so attached to the way their character played it because they felt like they were navigating this awesome sci-fi epic. I don't know. I feel like it'd be one of the most satisfying adaptations to land and do well, but I feel like it'd be one of the most difficult just due to the nature of the gameplay and making the story translate, you know?
Right. Well, I think that's like in that TikTok I created, one of the main points is having someone who is a writer or director of the games
Yeah.
be writing or directing the adaptation or a part of the group that does.
That's true.
Um, like before making that video, I was like, okay, what does like why do I feel like Fallout's going to be such a great TV show? I was like, all right, let me go do some digging. I was like, oh, like yeah, the director of the Fallout games is heavily involved in the writing piece, right?
Yeah.
And like heavily involved in the production. It's like, okay, that's pretty cool. I looked at on the animated side, I looked at Cyberpunk Edgerunners TV show,
Which
which
is
is
based on
based
the Cyberpunk
on the
2077 game.
Cyberpunk, yeah, on the video game, and like the TV show was produced, written, and like fully directed by CD Project Red. So like the video is the same
So
company just came
probably
in and made
huge
a TV show.
overlap of the same people working on both in that case.
Exactly. So
That's cool.
like that ensures that so many things that the players are expecting are going to work out. So
Yeah.
when attacking that I don't know, that very fine line of like
Yeah.
pleasing the players and creating a good show, like you have to involve those people from the studios that made the games.
Hmm.
And I think that they may come up to like let's say you're tackling the project, they may come up to you and be like, "Hey, this is a storyline we never actually explored."
Oh, that's a good point.
Then it's like, "Oh,
That's a very
cool,
good point.
great. Here's our storyline, right?"
Yeah,
Uh,
because then it can be like simultaneous to the main. That's a good point.
yeah. So it's not a necessarily like a retelling of the linear story, but there is something else that may be happening. Or in I mean, in the case of Mass Effect, like if you just say, okay, he's a neutrally good character, like let's
Yeah.
just have it play out.
Right. Or
And
like make him a good character, him or her, make
yeah.
them a good character and have them struggle with, because I feel like in the game that's one of my few criticisms of it is that when you play the renegade as opposed to Paragon, you're usually just like a mean person. Like
Right.
so
You're just
if
a yeah.
yeah, you're just a dick to everyone. So I'd rather it be like if you were very like had a difficult choice, like okay, do I save this big group or like sacrifice someone else? Like really tough choices where like you could do that part well. But I was thinking too, like a lot of people get really attached to who they decide to romance in the games for your crew. How
Also
would you
true.
tackle that too? You'd have a bunch of Garrus stands who would be real salty if you had them go with a more traditional Liara or something. I don't know. It's hard. So
Yeah.
yeah,
No,
there's
you're
a
right.
yeah. Like, I just imagine like if Amazon was like, "Hey, Josh, you're gonna be the showrunner on a Mass Effect show," I'd be like, "Yes, no."
No.
Like it's so hard and it's so frustrating because it's such a rich universe with so many cool elements that like it's a travesty that it's not a show, but also I get that it's like I have no idea how I'd approach it.
Yeah, it's just too which you could potentially say that about some of the other video games that have been adapted, right? But yeah, yeah, Mass Effect is definitely because I'm trying to think of other games similar to Mass Effect.
And I think it's kind of an outlier because like pretty much
Yeah.
every other game I could think about games that don't have adaptations, how I'd do it. For instance, Legend of Zelda, big fan. Um, I would probably either do a lot of the old Game Boy games, which were the gameplay was very limited to the platform it was on, but it had a fun story. You could tell that as like an animated show almost aimed at like kids or young teenagers as just a fun whimsical fantasy world
Uh-huh.
and doing it that way, or if you wanted to do some of the newer games in a much more kind of serious fantasy adventure like mini series with live action, and you could just focus away from the puzzle solving and the gameplay, which is so fun for the players, and focus on the storyline, it'd be a pretty easy shift. Also, like XCOM 2, my favorite game, I play it for the gameplay, but the story's cool. And if I was telling the story, it would be just a version of people in the resistance fighting the aliens and their adventure and missions, and I'd focus on character driven. Like I'd probably do that as a movie, not a show per se. But
Mhm. Yeah.
and then with Halo 2, I would want to do like a story following like ODSTs or other people who are peripheral to Master Chief's thing, because I think his story is best told through a combination of video games and books. I'd rather want to see other people in that big universe struggling with the Covenant conflict and stuff like that, exploring alien planets, finding old Forerunner tech. That's how I'd approach those. And so, those are all the meaningful video games in my life. I'd never try to adapt Baldur's Gate 3 because I'm like,
Yeah.
just go play D&D if you want more of that, or like they did with the D&D movie, which I'm actually wearing a
Yeah.
shirt for.
Yeah.
They were like, we're not going to try to tell like Curse of Strahd or one of the modules they have. They just took a setting like some cities that were in D&D, told made totally new fun characters and told a cool story, and it was a great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%. Yeah, they took the realm of here's the world we're in. Let's just tell a cool story inside that world.
Yes. Um, and so with everything else, I feel very confident that I could adapt it pretty well, but not Mass Effect, which is a bummer because I love those games. And yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. When you first asked me, like, okay, like, all right, the question is like, how would you adapt Mass Effect? And I didn't even like. You did way more research, I'm sure, than I did because I was just like, crap, I don't know. Like, it
right.
doesn't follow any, and that's where, like, truly, I think just having people from the game involved, they've been in it for so long and they know, like, a lot of that storytelling work was done for the games, and
True.
so then they can say, oh, here's a great, like, side, you know, I don't know, side quest or something that, like,
Yeah.
we could tell, or um here was our initial story of, like, Shepard going through the games, and, like, here's that linear story, and then we went back and, like, drew all the offshoots and stuff, but all right,
Yeah.
we have the linear story, maybe let's tell that. um
That's a good point.
but yeah, I think, yeah, yeah, when you asked that, I was like, dude,
Well,
it's gonna be an
I
interesting
think
conversation because I don't know.
the closest I can get is what you just said is that like it's almost like with a lot of the newer Star Wars things, I feel like the best Star Wars content we've ever gotten has been like kind of a two-person led thing. Like I got
Mm,
an Andor poster right there, which the showrunner, Tony Gilroy, he's not a Star Wars fan. He came in and did reshoots on Rogue One for like the third act primarily. He did like the Bourne movies. He does a lot of like real world political stuff,
okay.
but he liked the characters in Rogue One, so he ended up doing Andor. And they have consultants on the show who are big Star Wars nerds. But Tony Gilroy, he's like, I just want to tell a good story. I don't give a shit about Star Wars, and it worked out well. Kind of that's how it worked out with like the new Han Solo movie, which I thought was extremely good. Is that the two showrunners? It was or the two writers. It was a father and son, John Kasdan and Lawrence Kasdan.
Hmm.
And Lawrence Kasdan is like he wrote Empire Strikes Back, but he got hired to do that and was like, I'm just going to write the best movie I can. And George Lucas made it Star Warsy, and he kind of did that with Solo, where his son's like our age, huge Star Wars nerd, and so him and his dad collaborated to make a good movie that was also like it appealed to my Star Wars nerd like sensibilities, but it was a really great fun adventure movie too. I think you would need like someone who's a good sci-fi
Yeah,
writer and showrunner for something like The Expanse or For All Mankind or like Battlestar Galactica, same showrunner for those last two, but like someone who does big sci-fi and understands TV shows as a medium, and
yep.
then like the game director of Mass Effect. Those two are the two in charge. They kind of are the two, balances of the force, and they bring it to life. I think that'd be the best way to do it.
Yeah,
But I think the Mass Effect name would bring a lot of people in, but keeping them would be a fine line to walk. So that's
for sure.
I'd love to
Uh,
be a junior in the writers' room so I could take credit for the successes and throw the hard questions to someone else.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Leave it up to someone much smarter than us. That's for sure.
Yes, agreed. But well, this was a fun deep dive into video game adaptations. I guess one last question I want to ask you, or
Yes.
two quick questions.
Okay.
First off, what is your favorite Halo game now that you're replaying them?
Ooh. Um, Probably Halo 3,
Okay,
and I don't know why.
that's valid. I get torn between 2 and Reach is where I get
Okay.
torn. But I really like Halos 1 through 5 and Halo Wars. I love all those
Yeah.
games emphatically. So it's a
Yeah.
hard choice to pick a
Yeah, for
favorite.
sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, I've right now replaying them, I'm still in the first one
Nice.
because I'm doing it all in Legendary, and it's way
Oh
harder
god.
than I
Oh yeah.
remembered it, like, in Legendary. But I was like, oh yeah, sure.
By
Like,
nostalgia, you meant pain and frustration also.
right, right. And I'm also trying to find all the skulls, which is
Oh
also fun.
man,
So
that's I salute you, sir.
I'm taking the hard way
Oh god.
replaying them.
I think I did a
But
full skull run on Halos 1 through 3. I
yeah,
think those are the only three I like maxed out.
yeah, Yeah, so I think 3, and I don't quite remember why. But also, like, the hard part, like, all right, what's your favorite Halo game? Like, multiplayer was a big part of our like teenage years, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
okay, which games had the best multiplayer?
I can taste the Mountain Dew in my mouth right now as we talk about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But my
Yeah.
yeah, that's a hard one. But my part two, final question: if someone came up to you and was like, "Here's $100 million, you can adapt any video game you want into a TV show or movie," which would you do? You're the showrunner. You got $100 million. What would you do?
Ooh. That's I mean, honestly, like, my initial answer is gonna be, like, Fallout, just because
Yep.
I really love those games, so it's awesome that that's gonna be a TV show.
Yep.
One that isn't or hasn't been adapted. This is hard because I've played video games almost my entire life, so there's a lot of them
You could
that
do
have.
Halo the right way.
Yeah, right, right. That's probably what I would do, honestly, like Halo the right
Yeah.
way. But if I had to choose one, at least that isn't like a TV show, um, like Assassin's Creed
Oh,
has a movie which
did you
didn't
see it?
do.
I never saw it.
Yeah, it wasn't great.
Yeah.
They
Those were great
focused.
games too. I haven't thought about that in a while.
Right? So, like, because they're also semi-historical and,
Yeah.
like, semi-accurate to the history, and I like
Oh, you could do a
historical
great
movies.
mini series with that.
So you could do there's so much in the Assassin's Creed world that would be really fun to do,
Yeah.
and I think I would maybe go with that.
Oh, that'd be incredible. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know how I didn't think of that. Because you could do kind of what we said, get someone who's part of the game, who's done a lot of the historical research, and have you don't have to have like Desmond, or I know they followed some other characters in the later games, but have someone from our time going through the Animus and exploring parts of history, and that miniseries follows them in these different historical times. I'd watch that. That'd be great.
Yeah, and, like, the movie focused too much on the present day stuff.
Oh, it's got to be a
So
balance. So it's not
yeah,
even a
so it's
balance. It's got
just
to
like,
be just enough
eh,
modern day stuff and 80% historical,
yeah, and,
ninety
like,
percent
what the
historical.
Animus was, like, it's just too much, like, no, I like, take me back in time.
Yeah,
So I think that I don't know, that has a lot of potential, I think.
that would be cool. That's a great answer. I'd watch that.
Yeah,
Well,
for sure.
if Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk is listening, give Caleb $100 million. We will get you an awesome Assassin's Creed miniseries. It'll be
Yes,
great. It'll win all the awards that The Last of Us won. Absolutely,
100%.
guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
Well, Caleb, thank you for being on the podcast. This was an awesome, delightful episode. Again, people can find you on TikTok, CW, and also
Yep,
Whittle Lifts for
yep.
fitness stuff. And then check out the podcast. The
Everyday entrepreneurs.
Yes, because I listened to the first episode and learned what an entrepreneur was, and I was like, ooh. So
Yep.
awesome, awesome. Well, thank you for another episode of Nerds and Friends.
Thanks for having me on, Josh.
Of course.